Good evening and welcome to Crossroads. Now, if you were watching the news yesterday, you were likely shocked and appalled, but which side of the story you were shocked and appalled at, well, that would have been a lot different depending on which source of news you were actually following. Actually, the story even changed if you were watching most of the same outlets. If you were reading the New York Times, you would have seen the headline at the top of their site declaring this: Israeli strike kills hundreds in hospital, Palestinian officials say. You'd think Israel had just murdered hundreds of innocent people. There were stories of dead bodies covered in bloody blankets. New York Times quoted a Palestinian journalist saying that they never lived through a war this intense. Anger spread. It was reported that Iran raised a black flag over the shrine of Imam Reza for the first time, they said, signifying that when this happens, people should gather to it from all corners of the world, even if they have to crawl through the snow. And then the story was changed to being a flag calling for mourning, but many people stuck to the original claim, and analysts jumped on to suggest that a war with Iran was coming. The global call had been issued. Crowds of angry people in Muslim countries marched on U.S. embassies. Here they are in front of the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon, in fact. Alexander Dugin, credited as having the ear of Russian President Vladimir Putin, he wrote this: "Black flag on the top of Great Mosque of Mashhad and Khorasan is hung. The appeal of last day is pronounced." Crowds of people in Muslim countries marched and protests raged. But then the story started changing. Videos started emerging showing the alleged destruction of the hospital. One of the first showed a rocket fly into the air from within Gaza, then divert and destroy a nearby target on its own soil. Then it turned out that that video was a video of a rocket misfire from August last year and had nothing to do with the hospital. People accused pro-Israelis of spreading fake news. But then other videos emerged, and this time, well, they were confirmed videos. They showed that a rocket fired from Gaza apparently misfired and then struck a location also in Gaza, right by that hospital. The official X page on the State of Israel posted a video from Al Jazeera, and slowly after that, the story began to change. Remember, earlier in the day, the New York Times wrote that an Israeli strike killed hundreds at the hospital, but then at 8 p.m. they changed the headline on their homepage to this: "At least 500 dead in strike on Gaza hospital, Palestinians say." They removed Israeli from the title. Then half an hour later, after the first change, they changed the headline on their homepage again, and it now said this: "Hundreds dead in blast at Gaza hospital, Palestinians say." 500 turned into hundreds. Strike turned into blast. People began noticing the discrepancy. Earlier in the day, they had been told by the New York Times that an Israeli strike killed hundreds at the hospital, but then they removed Israel from the headline. So were they now suggesting it was not Israel? Then they changed the number killed to being over 500. Then they changed the number back to just saying hundreds, and also changed the word strike to blast. And people noted the problem the way the story had been covered. CNN, the Associated Press, in fact, most of the news sources we're told are free from the so-called scourge of disinformation. Well, they ran that story, very similar to it. And then they were quickly accused of reporting it based just on claims from Hamas, a terrorist organization, and the Palestinian Health Authority. And then today, President Joe Biden stated that the attack on the hospital in Gaza was not from Israel.
Like the entire world, I was outraged and saddened by the enormous loss of life yesterday in the hospital in Gaza. Based on the information we've seen to date, it appears the result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza.
Now, Biden even said it was done by the other team during his meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu.
I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you.
Meanwhile, in a very strange turn of events, it seems the hospital is still there. It looks like a rocket actually hit the parking lot. There were just over a dozen burned out vehicles in the various photos. There wasn't much of a crater, a tiny one, suggesting the explosive used was not that powerful. And while there was some damage to nearby buildings, it did not appear to be significant. Of course, it does seem people were killed, although the number is still not known. Photos are now coming out showing the alleged bodies covered in blankets, and the victims are allegedly civilians. We don't actually know. It's a tragedy regardless, and it appears that now it was a tragedy committed by Hamas, whether intentionally or not, against the people in Gaza. But beyond any of that, in context of the broader conflict, well, the evidence is not going to change everybody's mind. It's been the nature of what they call the fog of war. Prussian general and military theorist Karl von Clausewitz described it in his book On War, and he said this: war is the realm of uncertainty. 3/4 of the factors on which action in war is based are wrapped in a fog of greater or lesser uncertainty. It's the difficulty in discerning truth from fiction during a conflict. It's the clashing of narratives of warring armies, the propaganda, the ruses, the conflicting beliefs on both sides. And well, the reality is, when it comes to ideology, people will believe whatever they want. And with some people, you can shower them with facts. You can show them pages and pages of evidence. You can play videos, and they still will not believe you. This is even more so these days because of things like AI images, deep fake videos, online censorship, and of course the good old fake news media. What people are shown as reality becomes the reality they live in. And it's difficult to break that illusion since for them, a lot of times, it can be like breaking reality itself. Many people don't dare change the views that shape their own worlds. Now take the current conflict as an example. People are still enraged. This morning, in fact, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain issued calls to their citizens to immediately leave Lebanon for their own safety. The United States issued a do not travel advisory in response to pro-Palestine protesters setting a fire outside the embassy in Beirut. The explosion at the hospital, or outside of it, depending on which story you believe, has now sparked global protests. Many news outlets are still framing the story, interestingly, as both sides blaming the other. And it's fair to say this is because not everybody believes the integrity of the evidence. For many people, perceived reality, which evidence really you choose to believe and which you don't, then falls on which side you already happen to agree with. The hospital blast will join the annals of history as a he said, she said, and this is not new. We still debate over the narrative on 9/11. We still debate the facts of what happened on January 6th. With the Russia-Ukraine war, there are still questions of who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Both sides accuse the other of it. Now, of course, I have my own ideas on these, and I don't shy away from sharing them. I believe the integrity of evidence I can show is pretty dang solid, and it comes down to a willingness to look at the full body of evidence, then make a discernment as best as possible while not making hard conclusions until the facts are clear. But again, this is the nature of conflicts. This is the nature of war. Whether it's social disputes, criminal trials, and again, this war in this case, proper discernment requires a calm observance of the facts. And of course, as this conflict develops, well, I'll do my best to show you what I believe is most accurate I can show you as we go forward.